My name is Edith Lee Harris, and I am here to talk to you a little bit today about my father, Dr. Edwin A. Lee. I've been asked to talk about a few things, and the first would be what made him choose a career in medicine? Well, I sat at his desk in his office a few times when I was a young person and asked him why he wanted to be a doctor and why he chose medicine. So I think I have a good answer to that. And he said I guess my first question to him was, how old were you when you knew you wanted to be a doctor? He said, oh, 6 or 7 years old. Well, my dad grew up on a farm. So I thought that was kind of an unusual answer for somebody who lived in the country 25 miles or so away from a real town. And I don't know that there were too many doctors out where he was. He was born in 1914, right before World War I, in Mississippi, in the middle of the country. And Mississippi was very deeply segregated. So doctor was a strange career for him to want to choose. But what he did tell me was his mother was a country midwife. She had gone to what they called then a finishing school, but which was sort of a couple grades past high school. And I guess maybe she learns, I don't know this for sure, but maybe she learned some skills in midwifery when she trained at the Mary Holmes School. So she saw something in her son, and she had 8 children altogether. My dad was in the middle somewhere, so I don't know how she picked him up, but she saw an aptitude in him. And when she would go to deliver babies, she would take him, this little 5, 6, 7-year-old kid, with her. Sometimes, I guess, in the middle of the night. Um, they didn't have phones back then, so it was probably someone just coming on a horse or in a buggy and saying, come quick. And she started taking him with her. And so from a little child up, he was um, even assisting her in some way. I don't know exactly what he was doing. Maybe he was fetching things, maybe he was holding things, but he was watching the process of birth and, understanding all that. Well, farm kids know a lot about birth because of the animals that they tend. So, that's when he decided that he wanted to be a doctor from a young child, watching his mother take care of the women in the community, in that farming community in Sunflower County, Mississippi. Fortunately, both of his parents had had some advanced education. My grandfather, although it's hard to believe, he was one generation away from slavery. He was born in 1874 in Mississippi, but he graduated from college in 1901. So both of his parents had education, and they had some financial wherewithal, so they were able to support him going to school and encourage him even to go to medical school. So they made sure that he even to had to go away to go to high school because there was no school where he was. So his father rented a house in Jackson, Mississippi, which was, maybe 100 miles away from where he grew up, so that his mother could live there and he could live there while he went to high school there. Okay, so he knew what he was going to be from an early age. But back to the farm for a second. Um, when I was asking him questions about becoming a doctor, the story that he told me first was that he did his first operation on a chicken when he was 7 years old. And I'm like, Dad, what made you cut up a chicken? He said the chicken had an obstruction in its bowel, had a rock stuck in what's called a craw. And he cut the chicken's belly open, I guess, took the rock out and stitched the chicken back up. And the chicken lived. And at least until, maybe Sunday dinner a few weeks later. But I just thought that was really remarkable that a 7-year-old kid would do that. But then given the background, I started to understand. So from there, he went to Meharry Medical School, which was a Black medical school, which still exists in Nashville, Tennessee, one of only 2 Black medical schools in the country at that time, which were Meharry in Nashville and Howard University Medical School. And basically, if you were a Black person during segregation during those years, in the early, Dad was in school in the late 1920s. And so basically, it was very hard to get into a white school at that time, if you could at all. And in the South, forget about it. So he had opportunity, he had backing from his family, and he had the desire. So I think those were the main ingredients that made him go. And he had a drive. He had a drive to succeed. So he did. He also, as soon as he graduated from medical school, World War II was just breaking out. So within the same month of his graduation, he received his commission to go into the Army and go to war. In the Philippines, he was in the South Pacific, but he was a medical officer. And so, again, that gave him an extra, it wasn't something he had planned for, it wasn't something he sought out, but he volunteered, as did most of his classmates in the class of 1941, his medical school classmates. And they ended up all overseas under the harshest conditions, doing surgery, saving people who had, were hit by grenades and bombs and that sort of thing, and had gangrene and just really some harsh conditions. But it made him a great doctor. And when he got home, he came to Springfield. And that leads me to the second part of, I guess, what I've been asked to discuss, which is, was it a good choice for him to come to Springfield? Well, he came there by accident because there was only one Black doctor there, another doctor that had graduated from Meharry, and he died right at the time where my father was looking for a place to set up his practice. And so his wife, who knew that he was looking for a practice, said, please come, the wife of the doctor who had died, Dr. Williams, I believe his name was, his widow said, please come to Springfield. You can have my husband's office. You can have his instruments. And so in probably a year later, 1960, my dad had built the Lee Medical Building, which not only housed his office, but housed the office for Dr. Charles Young, who was a foot doctor, and Dr. D. Webster, who was a dentist, and also a lab technician, Mr. Charles Spencer, who later became a doctor, a PhD, who taught medical technology at Illinois State University. So there was, for the first time, it was good for the Springfield community because there was, for the first time, on the east side of Springfield, and I say for the first time, I believe it was the first time. Dr. Kennebrew was much earlier, but I'm not sure where his office was. But at any rate, for the first time in many years, there was a place for the people on the east side of town and Black people. And this was, we say segregation and you think of the South, but Springfield was pretty segregated up to that point, up to 1960 or so. And so this was a place where people could come, and he had office hours sometimes in the evening. Even he had them on Monday and Friday night. He'd work all afternoon, come home, eat dinner, and go back to the office and see patients who could not take off time for work, did not have leave, and they could come in and see him. The other thing that I think was really a blessing for Springfield, especially not just for Black people, but Black and white people. When my father started practicing, the wards at the hospitals were segregated, if you can believe it. St. John's and Memorial, both. And you might have gotten a private room, but you had to share it with another Black person. That's the only way you could get a private room. And then you couldn't share a room with the white person. You couldn't have a room to yourself. So my father fought for all that to change. He was the only Black physician on staff. He did most of his work at St. John's, as I said, but he really changed how those institutions began to deal with Black patients, other non-white patients, because his clientele was not all Black. There were white people, and people of other ethnicities too. So, he just made a lot of changes. In fact, just to tell you how, at the end of his career, it was very interesting. Before he retired, he became chief of surgical staff at St. John's. And that's not a position that somebody hires you for. He was, as a staff member in the hospital, the surgeons, who were, except for him at that point, all white, chose him to run their department because they knew he was the most skilled of all of them. And he was the best. He just had a great head and he could deal with people of all kinds. So that was quite an honor for him before he ended his career in 1993. Would I recommend a career in science or medicine particularly? I can really only speak for medicine. There have been several other people in my family since my father who have become doctors. And it's not only, I think it's a gratifying career because you're helping people, you're fulfilling a need that you want. I mean, it's hard work. He used to get up he'd get calls in the middle of the night after working all day to come deliver a baby. He probably, I don't know how many babies he delivered, and that was not the prime area of his practice. He was a general practitioner, what we call family doctor now. But it's very hard work, and especially if you're doing solo practice, which is what he did. Nowadays, people tend to work in groups, so it's a little bit easier. But it's got to be very fulfilling to change how the system works. He wasn't a civil rights person, but he kind of became one because he had to blaze trails in that area. And I think even today, you will find that trails still need to be blazed. And I hope that in whatever career you choose, that you look at some of these people who came before you and look at their example and think about what they did and let them be the wind beneath your wings. Thank you.